One of the coolest ways to preserve wild leafy green plants today, Aveluk, Armenian dried braided dock. So braiding food is a great tradition, and you have all kinds of different cultures that do it around the world. Braided garlic, braided timsala, but braiding greens isn't something that you hear about too often. And curly dock is particularly suited for this preparation because the greens are long. That being said, other greens that are long, like ramp leaves, can be preserved the same way. And the big takeaway here is that you can dehydrate wild leafy greens, use them in your cooking, and they're delicious. I was just shocked when I ate the finished soup that you make with these because the flavor is fantastic. It's mild, it's not very strong, and honestly, anyone would like it. It's also an ingenious method of making a really sustaining soup from really humble ingredients. So you can see I'm just braiding the greens here, taking my time, and after each leaf is put on, I'm going to put a new leaf on every single time. And I'm going to leave the stems overhanging on the side because you want to braid the leaves and not the stems. And after the whole braid is made, and you can make the braids any size that you like, you could make them, 10, 15 feet long and then wrap them into a round, which is traditional. After the greens are braided, you're going to trim off the stems and kind of clean it up a little bit. And like I said, you're braiding the greens here, not the stems. If you braid the stems, it could make the braid a little bit brittle and it could unravel. So you want long greens like greens on the bottom. You can't try to make this with small greens unless you have incredibly small hands. Don't try to do that. Once the braid is all made, you're just going to go through and clean it up a little bit. Mine is not as pretty as an Armenian grandmother's would be, but that's okay. And there we go. Once you're done, you're going to have something like that. You can make the braids as big or as long as you like. Now for drying them, there's a couple particulars here. I found the best way for me was drying the greens when they're exposed to the sun. The sun helps them keep their color, and you want a place with airflow. You can also dry them by putting a fan next to them. Sometimes in traditional recipes and pictures, you're going to see greens like the greens on the left, and they may be discolored a little bit. That doesn't affect the flavor, but it isn't as aesthetically pleasing. The greens on the right, I dried until they were cracker dry, exposed them to the sun, so they kept a little bit more of the green color, which is ideally what you want when drying food, when drying greens. So to make the soup, we're going to take our braid of greens. This is a year later, and you can see my greens are brittle. A lot of times in traditional recipes and things, you're going to see that the greens are more pliable that they use. It's totally fine if your greens are cracker dry like mine. It is much better for your greens to be brittle and crumbly than for them to have any water, because if those greens mold and you try to make soup out of them, it's going to taste like a liquid gym sock. Don't ask me how I know that. And okay, this is the coolest part. So to rehydrate the greens, we just pour some boiling water over them. And then we're going to let the greens cool in the bowl. And then we're going to drain them off and we're going to discard that water. And when you do this, make sure to taste that water because you're going to taste that it has a very strong flavor. So you can almost think of this is so cool. You can think of this almost as like reverse blanching, if that makes any sense. So after the greens are cooled down, now I'm going to cut them just into bite-sized pieces just to make sure that they don't hang off of a spoon. But you want the greens to have texture. So just give them a little chop there. Now to make the soup, we're going to start off with a big glob of butter. Traditionally, clarified butter would be used. And then we're going to add some onions and garlic, and we're going to cook that until it's translucent. Add a nice big pinch of salt. This soup will eat salt. Then we're gonna add some potatoes. This is a really sustaining filling dish, and it is traditionally meat-free. Potatoes, beans, dried greens, and actually nuts at the end. It just really is a sustaining soup and one of those ingenious traditional foods. Add some beans, add some stock. My pan is a little bit small, so I'm gonna switch to a bigger one there. Like I said before, it's really incredible. Just 1 ounce of greens here is gonna make like a quart and a half of soup. That's incredible. I'm gonna add some dried hot chili and a little bit of coriander, add the greens, and this soup particularly, and soups like it, this is just crying out for dried spices. So the flavors of the Caucasus and Eastern Europe, places like Georgia and Armenia, fenugreek could be added, coriander could be added. I add some dried dill is wonderful. Fresh mint and parsley at the end is very good, but dried spices are really gonna give you some good flavor here, and it's a perfect way to kind of round out how you want it to taste. Just gonna bring that up to a simmer, cook it till the potatoes are tender, and now we're gonna buzz it with a hand blender a little bit. Make sure the potatoes are tender. Like I said, plenty of salt, a little pepper too. But we're gonna use a hand blender, and we are not going to puree the soup. All we want to do is break it up just a little bit, just to break up a few potatoes and beans to thicken it so it isn't loose. But you want to keep the texture of the greens. The texture of the dried greens is very good, and it's part of the traditional character that I like to preserve when I'm making this. There's some dried dill, not traditional, but a very good addition. And then we finish it with a little bit of vinegar and a handful of chopped walnuts. I'm using black walnuts and butternuts here, but yeah, a soup of beans, greens, potatoes, and nuts, and it will really fill you up. And it's easy to make, it's cheap. I just love this. So there you go. Thanks for watching. I hope you try making Aveluk soup, and happy spring to you.